When was the last time you looked at your systems, your routines, your habits, your planning methods, and asked yourself, is this still working for who I am now and where I want to go? If you can't remember, that's probably a sign it's been too long. While you have a moment of reflection, let me introduce myself. Hi, my name is Aleja, but you can call me Lay. Welcome back to A Little Atypical, where we dive into all things wellness, personal development, and lifestyle topics. I like to approach typical topics from a not so typical perspective, and that's exactly what we're going to do today. Here's the thing. You're not the same person you were 6 months ago or even 3 months ago. Your goals have shifted, your energy levels have changed, your priorities have evolved, and yet so many of us are still trying to run on systems we built for a version of ourselves that no longer exist. We're operating with outdated systems built for a previous version of ourselves and then wondering why everything feels so much harder than it should. And I just want to say that this energy isn't a sign that you're broken. It's a signal that your systems need recalibration. When what used to feel supportive starts to feel suffocating, that's your cue. As you know, the theme of the month is year review and future planning. And it honestly feels like a full circle moment because I started this year talking about goals and systems in episodes 41 through 43. And at other times of the year, like in episodes, I believe 57, 58, and 61, I was speaking about little micro shifts I was making for the different seasons, but those were more about habits than the actual systems I was working with. If you missed last week's episode, it was all about things you can do to effectively review your year, and you should definitely listen to that first because today is going to be all about systems. Instead of focusing on building them like we talked about at the start of 2025, we're going to be talking about upgrading them. And while the phrase rings true, if it's not broke, don't fix it, knowing what aspects of your systems are lacking for your up-leveled goals is so important. In fact, the biggest reason for upgrading your systems, what I found, includes it cuts down decision fatigue. When your routines actually fit who you are now, you're not constantly reinventing the wheel. You stop wasting mental energy on stuff that should just be automatic, which frees up space for the things that actually need your creative brain power. Second reason is small tweaks add up over time, so it's kind of like compound interest. When you make little improvements to your systems now, they stack up and create exponential results down the line without you having to work exponentially harder. You're just working smarter. And the last reason is they actually help you avoid burnout because systems that get regular upgrades can flex your changing energy, shifting priorities, and your actual life circumstances. Sustainability becomes built into the system instead of something you're constantly chasing. And I'm just really excited to be able to talk about all this. But before we get into all the tactical stuff today, I wanted to pause for a second and talk about something really important, which is empathy. Because as I was planning this episode around November 1st, there was a lot happening in the world. SNAP benefits were ending for many people. There were threats to healthcare and cost increasing. Companies were doing mass layoffs. And as I was outlining what I want to cover, systems, goal setting, future planning, all the things that come to mind and everything I'm going to talk about today, I had to just pause, and ask myself, can I really jump into talking about systems and goal setting at a time when so many people are just trying to survive? With the addition of it being the holiday season and so many people grappling with uncertainty, would it even be a good idea when people are struggling with having faith right now in themselves or just in life in general? Most productivity advice assumes you have the cognitive bandwidth to spare, but survival mode, it just depletes your working memory and overall your executive function on a biological level. It makes even simple tasks feel overwhelming. And the thing is, systems require what psychologists call metacognition. So, thinking about thinking. You need the mental space to reflect on what's working, adjust your approach, and plan what's ahead. But survival mode shuts down the capacity. Your brain basically narrows its focus to the present moment only. And I know earlier, this is going to sound so ironic, that systems are designed to reduce decision fatigue and create stability, but building them requires the very resources that survival mode depletes, which is like focus, energy, and mental clarity. So, this is why people in crisis often can't just get organized. And I wanted to say this because it's just not a character flaw. I know a lot of people think they're lazy or just, not good at the organizational things. And I just want to say that when you're in survival mode, you're fundamentally in a different neural state that makes planning difficult. And understanding this can really help remove shame. So if you're struggling to build systems while dealing with financial stress, health concerns, instability, you're not failing. You're just experiencing a normal human response to a perceived threat. In addition to what I've been realizing about systems and what I'm thinking about to upgrade my personal systems, I started to consider what is a reasonable way to build systems, even if you're in survival mode. I wanted to share some things I found upon research. So here are some ideas for building systems while being in survival mode. First, start with a single anchor habit. One 5-minute action that signals safety to your nervous system. It could be anything really, like drinking water while standing in the sunlight each morning, or pretty much anything. It could literally cost nothing, but just helps regulate your cortisol, and it reorientates your brain towards stability without requiring complex planning. Second idea I found was to create a decision-free day template, which will be used on your worst days. So basically, you kind of pre-write a simple script of exactly what are you going to do hour by hour, like the typical things like wake up, eat this specific meal, do this one specific task, rest here, blah, blah, So when your prefrontal cortex shuts down, you can just follow the map instead of making a bunch of new choices. And I would suggest with the meal part, because I know sometimes if you are insecure, like in a place of food insecurity, I would just choose things that you always keep in the house. So like if that's canned food, and like something that is like usually basic is like having eggs, beans, stuff like that. And something I do with chickpeas is sometimes I have like a chickpea scramble. So just list things that you typically have in the house for your meals, and that should really help. Third thing is using body doubling through free resources. And what this essentially is working alongside someone via, like a co-working stream, like on YouTube or like a Discord server. The presence of others doing focus works tricks your brain into thinking you're like in a safer, more productive environment without actually requiring the energy to socialize. And the fourth thing I found that people said was very useful is when you implement a 90-second reset ritual. And it's basically anything you could do anywhere. So some examples of this is when you kind of take 3 deep breaths while naming things you can see. And basically the point is to engage your parasympathetic and nervous system and briefly pull your brain out of threat mode, kind of giving you micro windows of clarity so you can take small steps towards whatever you're working towards in the day. Including this disclaimer was really important for me because I know not everything I say in the following will resonate, but you can always come back to upgrade your systems once you're out of survival mode, or just completely rebuild them too. So now that we covered the survival mode piece, I want to shift gear to talk about some of the important lessons I learned this year in relating to systems and just things I learned while actively trying to figure out systems that work well for myself. So my first lesson was the best systems to build are the ones that reflect your values and identity. Recently something that has been really refreshing to see is the whole movement, which is I think it's called the anti-hustle system movement. And it's basically people saying, you know what, we're done with toxic hustle culture and the whole grind mentality, and also just coming up with different ways to approach discipline without it feeling so suffocating. And instead of glorifying being busy all the time and burning ourselves out for achievement, this approach actually treats rest like it's productive. Like downtime, sleep, recovery, those things aren't getting in the way of success. They're literally part of what makes success possible. And it's all about finding a pace you can actually sustain, working with your natural energy instead of forcing yourself to go hard all the time when your body and brain is just screaming for a break. And overall, it's about quality over quantity. Doing meaningful work that actually matters instead of just trying to check off a million tasks or work crazy hours just to prove yourself or prove something. And it requires you to set actual boundaries and create balance in your life, protecting your personal time, your relationships, your mental health, because those things matter just as much. And being intentional with what you say yes to, being selective about commitment, and getting comfortable with saying no to stuff that doesn't actually align with what you value, it also just leaves room for celebration and just being present, taking the time to acknowledge your wins and enjoying the moment instead of instantly jumping from the next goal on your list. This whole approach recognizes that burnout is not something to be proud of. Real success also includes feeling good, having joy in your life, and being able to keep going long term. And overall, how I view it, it's about building a life you don't constantly need to escape from with vacations just to recover. And for me, this shifted everything because I started caring about systems involving self-care, not just checking things off my productivity list. I brought mindset work into my routines. I got into time blocking to make sure to include structured freedom. And I spent real time figuring out what frameworks and tools actually clicked for me instead of just using whatever else everyone else is using, which actually brings me to my second lesson, which is it's okay to stop aligning with systems. So here is a lesson I learned. If you are always building, you'll eventually get sore. And how I figured this out is when I got more into my health journey and I was like working out consistently, eating as well as possible, doing the whole nines. And I was seeing results, which was amazing. But then I hit a wall where I just felt exhausted all the time. And my body was sore, I was irritable, and I was crashing out, like physically. I would be sitting there and 1 minute I'm awake, next minute I'm waking up and I don't know or remember falling asleep. That's when I learned about maintenance phases. Like, you can't just be in a building phase forever. Your body literally needs times to rest and maintain what you built. And it's not being lazy or falling off. It's actually just a part of the process. You push for a bit and then you maintain. You push for a bit again, and that's how you create something that's sustainable. And it hit me one day that this applies to literally everything, including how I approach systems and goals. Let's take the 12-week year, for example. I tried it, and I tried it for years because everyone raves about it. And I did like how it broke the year into quarters. But here's what happened. For those entire 12 weeks, I was constantly in build mode. No breaks, no maintenance phase, just go, go, go. My weekends and weekdays started to blur together in this endless cycle. And days when I didn't check off everything on my daily to-do list, I felt like I was falling behind, even though I couldn't really tell you what I was rushing towards or why. The whole system felt like it assumed I'd have the same energy every single day, which, let's be real, no one does. There was nothing in it that I specifically connected with to make me feel like, yes, this is it for me. And eventually I started to resent it, which felt weird because so many people swears by this system, but it just wasn't clicking for me. And of course, looking back, it could have been a bunch of different reasons. So maybe my goals weren't the right fit for that kind of system. Maybe I didn't break them down enough in a way that actually made sense for a yearly goal. I'm not completely sure. But what I do know is this: just like with my health journey, I learned that having a maintenance phase isn't optional, it's essential. Sustainability isn't about pushing all the time. It's about knowing when to push and when to pause. And that's something I'm bringing into how I build my systems now. And third lesson is challenges and curriculums, like personal curriculums, have their place. In general, they are things that are very useful, but you gotta use them right. Like challenges, they're perfect for experimenting with new things, but you can't just do them back to back, you know? This goes back to what I was saying before, but you gotta give breathing room between them. And personal curriculums are great when you're trying to learn something specific or work on a focused project. Honestly, I used to avoid these things completely, but now I realize they actually add some much needed spice to the whole process. Because here's what happens: there's this fine line between consistency and stagnation, right? And when your routine starts feeling less like I'm building something and more towards like I'm going through the motions, and not in a good way, like automatic things happening, that's kind of when you know you need a spurt of evolution and learning to come back in. So this sounds a little confusing. Let me break this down a bit. When mundane stops feeling like consistency and starts feeling like stagnation, which is so easy to cross over because, like I mentioned, there is a fine line between the two, the presence of evolution and learning becomes essential. Consistency is about intentional repetition that serves your goals. It's doing the same things because they're working, because they're moving you forward, because they create the foundation you need. Consistency feels grounding, it feels reliable. But stagnation is repetition without purpose. It's when you're going through the motions but not actually shifting. You're not growing, you're not learning, you're not evolving, you're just existing in a loop. And the tricky part is that they can look identical from the outside. Same morning routine, same work schedule, same habits. But internally, one feels like building and the other one feels like treading water. So, how do you know which side of the line you're on? I personally think when you ask yourself, am I learning something from this? Is this routine still challenging me in some way, even if it's subtle? Do I feel like I'm maintaining something valuable, or am I just avoiding change? This is exactly why challenges and personal curriculums have their place, because they inject intentional evolution into your systems. They give you something to learn, something to experiment with, something that reminds you that growth is still happening. And because I realized all this, the moment your systems stop requiring any mental engagement, when you start to do everything on autopilot without thinking, that's kind of when you need to assess whether you're in a maintenance mode, which is good and necessary, or whether you cross into stagnation, which slowly drains your motivation. The solution isn't to blow up your entire life or constantly chase newness. It's about being intentional with the evolution. So that can look like adding one new element to an existing routine, setting micro challenges within a habit you already mastered, learning something adjacent to what you've been already doing, or just like rotating between building phases and maintenance phases so you know what mode you're just in. And the presence of evolution and learning doesn't mean you have to be in hustle mode all the time either. It just means you're engaged with what you're doing. You're present, you're noticing, and when something stops serving you, you have the awareness to adjust before resentment builds. And that is essentially the difference between a system that sustains you and one that suffocates you. Now, the fourth and final lesson I wanted to include in this list is I like including rules and non-negotiables for myself. Rules create clarity, but honestly, I struggled with this because people tend to see having rules for yourself as a negative thing. Like they'll say you're running a strict program, or that you're not fun, or you're boring, that you're being too extreme about everything. And look, I get it. Sometimes people are too intense, and other times people are way too lax. But here's the thing. The level of intensity that works for you, that's for you to decide, no one else. The perfect level of intensity is whatever moves the needle for you without making you harsh on yourself. Because obviously there's a difference between saying, yeah, I didn't finish everything I wanted to, and some of that was on me, so next time I'll X, Y, and Z, versus sitting there calling yourself stupid or lazy or a total screw up and feeling embarrassed by yourself. Like, why? The goal should always be taking responsibility for what you do, not guilting yourself into the ground, and actually being willing to work towards real change. However, being too lax, that is also a form of self-neglect, and constantly making everything someone else's fault or blaming circumstances for every single thing, that doesn't help you. It just keeps you stuck and kind of breeds an environment that allows for you to weaponize incompetence. And you have to love yourself enough to know that you are more than capable to do what you want to do. So I just wanted to add that in. I hope that wasn't too harsh, but that was all the lessons I wanted to include. So now let's get into what I'm doing for my actual to-do list for planning. And these are just little things that I'm considering and working on as I upgrade my systems. So, process of elimination, I'm asking myself, what task am I releasing? What tasks am I prioritizing? And I'm making sure to make time for both immediate and future planning. And in addition to that, I am very dedicated to my tracker design, which I do every single year. So I'm figuring out which goals work better this time, digitally versus physically, because I realized I'm more accountable, for example, with my health goals when I use space in my journal. So when I design my new journal for my birthday with my typical chapter, in this case it's chapter 24, I made sure to include the health journaling style that helped me stay in maintenance throughout this year, because I know I'm probably going to go into a new phase of my health. Another example is when planning for content, it actually works better digitally for me. And there are areas of my life that I still don't know what works better and what makes me more accountable. For example, my career goals is still in a trial and error phase. I also discovered something new, and I kind of want to implement it in my daily tasks. So basically it is called the 3-3-3 method, which basically means listing down 3 big tasks, 3 medium tasks, and 3 small tasks per day. And I'm trying to see how this works and fits into my workflow. Part of me is hesitant because then I'm like, okay, sometimes I do get overwhelmed and I don't know what to count as a big task or a medium task or how I would define that. And I know that's probably just me overthinking it, but I do want to try to implement it and see how that goes. Next thing is I want to take note of which times are effective for in completing a task. So, for example, I have a very specific way of creating a podcast episode because I do monthly themes. So, before the month starts, I do a planning session and break down ideas that can fit under the theme. Then I have my personal criteria for selecting which ideas to pursue. I figure out what order makes sense and then I outline. And at my core, I'm a writer first. And I like to think of the way I form this podcast is kind of the vibe of an audiobook or like telling a story. So that is why in general, like my most comfortable form of creation is through blogs as opposed to doing short form videos, long form videos, photos. But I figured that if I can even just start with vocally creating and in a way that makes me comfortable, that maybe like the visual stuff wouldn't feel so difficult for me. But I'm getting too off topic. Anyways, outlining helps my thoughts because I can, as you can tell, easily jump from one point to another and kind of forget where I was going with it. But in general, it is a little bit time consuming for the moment, but it actually helps in the long run because it makes recording sessions so much shorter. But when I started thinking about like my day to day, sometimes I would spend my daytime outlining when I actually need the daytime for recording sessions because then it's guaranteed to be quiet enough. So then in my head, I'm like, does it make more sense to do outlining when it may not be as completely quiet, like towards like the evening hours? So that way I can have it like prepared to use it as soon as possible in the daytime, So that way I'm not wasting the limited daytime because sometimes it would be like, oh, I would spend one whole day outlining everything and then the day is done, so I can't even record it the same day of, so I have to wait till the next day. And if I wanted to do more than one episode a week, which I have been doing, I figured like I need to kind of like reel in my planning with this a little more. And the last thing I wanted to mention was, this is going to sound kind of ridiculous, but making a list of frogs. So, the saying, eat the frog in the morning, which, fun fact, that phrase originated from a Mark Twain's quote, which is, if it's your job to eat a frog, it's best to do it first in the morning. And if it's your job to eat two frogs, it's best to eat the biggest one first. And that quote was basically repurposed by Brian Tracy, who is, one of the big creators in terms of like self-help, personal development, and stuff like that. Here's the thing. I realized there are different types of frogs. There are mental frogs, physical frogs, emotional frogs, administrative frogs. And when I like sat down and thought about it, I personally don't mind doing mental tasks. Like my mind actually has a problem with producing too much thoughts and ideas. And when I like sat there and thought about it, my biggest frogs are my physical tasks, and I have a theory about why. So I believe there are three types of people: thinkers, doers, and connectors. Thinkers are the ones with very creative minds who struggle with execution. Because of their ability to think in uncommon ways, they also may feel disconnected from others, even if they're interesting people. Doers are the people who function better with hands-on tasks because they learn better, not just through words and visuals. They're just typically quick to understand tools and processes, but they may struggle with thinking things through, leaving them to be kind of like impulsive and potentially emotionally reactive, which also makes it hard to connect with people for long periods of time. And then there are people, the last one, connectors, which are people's people. They connect people with other people. They're the type to seem like to know everyone and have intelligence with social skills. They know how and where to find the right people, even if they don't possess certain skills themselves, although they technically could, but thoughts and actions just aren't their greatest strength. And this, of course, is a vague idea, but I think I fall into the thinker category. That's why physical tasks feel more like frogs to me, because mentally my brain is constantly on. There's no moment where I'm not going over something in my head, either about a specific project I'm working on or an idea for something I want to do, or memories of people and what they taught me. And so if I'm going to choose my frogs, I need to know what my frogs are. So with that being said, that is it, my friends. Those are my biggest lessons about systems this year and my actual to-do list for what I'm considering with upgrading my systems. I already know this might be a longer episode to edit, but I genuinely feel like the effort is worth it. And before we close out, I want to share what I'm grateful for this week. So actually 2 things I wanted to highlight, because I got very insightful career advice on October 31st, and I'm excited to try new things and see where it leads me. And the second thing is, I also feel like I've been on a very creative role when it comes to podcast creation, and I've been, as I mentioned earlier in this episode, recording 2 episodes per week, and honestly, I want to capitalize on this creative high I've been feeling to get at least podcast creation for the rest of 2025 done. It's not that I'm trying to rush through things, but there is just a lot to be done, especially in terms of like, I have not blogged in so long. Like, I haven't wrote anything in so long. There are things I want to do specifically for my career, and I just don't want to toss this aside because I have a whole list of other things. And so I'm just grateful for the creative high, and I just, want to get the most out of it. And now it is time for the card pull. And as usual, if card readings are not your thing or not something you personally align with, but you still like other aspects of my content, thank you for listening this far. Be sure to come back next week and follow the podcast to stay up to date about new releases. The card deck we're using for this episode is the Moonology deck, because when this episode comes out, the Scorpio new moon will be the Thursday, November 20th. So iconically, the card I pulled was New Moon in Aries, which, just like Scorpio, is ruled under Mars. Scorpio technically has 2 rulers, which is Pluto and Mars, so this energy just feels super aligned. But this is what the card says. New Moon in Aries, it's time to take action. The flame is lit. A wonderful new start beckons, and you're on the right track. Drawing this card is a cerebrally positive sign if there is something you want to happen in your life. Take this card as a big yes from the universe. This is the time to really tune in to your dreams. You may still have a long way to go after all. Aries is the first sign of the zodiac, but you're on your way. Determination, self-assertion, and bravery are called for, but the hot fire of Aries is driving you towards success in whatever your endeavors you're asking about. The caution, don't go too fast and forget your manners. Treat people well as you charge towards your goals. You'll create much better karma for yourself. Attune to the moon. Don't even think about giving up. Additional meanings for this card. Do your best and be happy with that. Avoid being brash right now. You need a 12-month plan. A new male is coming into your life. The teaching. Aries is the first of the zodiac signs, so the new moon in Aries is the first of the 12 or 13 new moons of the year. If you're committed to working with all the lunatations, then the new moon in Aries is the right time to start. And drawing this card, no matter when you do it, signifies it's also the ideal time to start your moon work, such as setting intentions. So both the card and the episode are about making a fresh start and kind of taking decisive action towards what you want. The new moon in Aries represents bold, new beginnings, which mirrors the episode's focus on upgrading systems, letting go of what's holding you back, and building routines that truly work for you. The card also warns against moving too fast or being inconsiderate, and that directly ties into the episode because of how we spoke about things like how to create systems within survival mode, for example. And I feel like that shows a lot of consideration, but also about this specific discussion about personal levels of intensity and things you do for yourself. And it's all about pushing yourself forward without being cruel to yourself or other people in the process. Essentially, both are saying take action, but do it thoughtfully and sustainably. Okay, so that's it for today's episode. Thank you for tuning into A Little Atypical. If you found this helpful, don't forget to follow/subscribe and share this with someone who might need to hear this message. Remember, view the description box where you can find important links, such as the one to my website, where there is so much more bonus content. Until next time, have a good day, evening, or night, and stay authentically atypical. XO, my loves. Okay, bye.